Yeah, that day, the day I used to go to a place like an hour from Cali. It's called Buga. There's like a saint that we believe in it. It's called El Señor de los Milagros. And I was gonna visit this guy because I made a promise to him. And but I couldn't do it because something happened in the soccer team. I had to, attend some meeting over there because they called me from the soccer team office that they needed me because we're making a big sell to Portugal, a player. And then I went there and I was there like 2 hours. And then my cousin came over and some friends. And then we decided to go and have lunch. I know something told me to call my wife. I called her, say I loved her, say goodbye. Maybe it was to say goodbye to her. And then that happened. No, 10 guys came to near the restaurant. 4 went up and they started shooting at us. And then I survived because I put my arms and I stand up, and then I got shot. And but when I fell to the ground, and mm, eh, I asked God to give me a new opportunity. And I thought about my little. I had 2 kids, but at that moment I only had one.
Mhm.
Isabella, my oldest daughter. And then he made a miracle. No, he saved me because in that moment I feel like I was not gonna die, and I didn't die. I was 8 times shot. 6 people died that day, and I lost almost half of my blood in my body.
William Rodriguez is an attorney, a family man, a contributor to both mentoring prisoners being released into society and conflict resolution at the highest level. Because William Rodriguez was a leader in the Cali Cartel, one of the largest and most successful drug cartels in Colombian history during its most violent and corrupt era. At the height of the Cali Cartel's reign from 93 to 95, they were cited as having control over 80% of the world's cocaine market and directly responsible for the growth of the market in Europe. By the mid-90s, the Cali Cartel's international drug trafficking empire was a $7 billion a year criminal enterprise. But William Rodriguez is a friend and a man that deserves to tell his story so that others might learn from his experience and we all become better for it. Please join me in welcoming to the T-Cast, William Rodriguez.
How are you, my friend?
Doing great, my brother. How you doing?
Fine, taking it easy. Here, today is very cold here for us. It's a little chilly.
Oh, yeah? Chilly in Miami?
Yeah, today is like 50, 52 degrees.
That is chilly.
For us, it's very cold.
Yes. Good. You square? You ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm not a very good English talker, but I'm gonna try.
Hey, well, this is really casual, so and it's an honor to have you here. It's been an honor to get to know you over the past several months. Working on another project, so I'm really looking forward to our conversation. The important stuff is to get to know who you are and understand a little bit more about your story, because obviously it's an amazing story, and the fact that you're here at all is pretty much an amazing feat, right? So I wanted to kind of touch on some subjects that came to mind as I read through your book, and that can be my first thing. Is you have a book out called Elegido? Is that correct? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, El Elegido.
Yeah. Okay. So so I got a lot of stuff from that, between that and some of our earlier conversations, and I really wanted to kind of touch on some things that most people don't necessarily know about you already. So. I guess I wanted to start by just asking you to tell me a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up, and kind of your experience up until the point that you maybe started getting into some of the criminal familia stuff.
Pues I was born in Cali, Colombia, in 1965. I lived in Colombia until I was like 6 years old. Then my mother decided to break up with my father, and she came to Chicago. We're here in the United States, and I lived there like from 6 until I was 11.
And that was
And I
you,
didn't see.
you had family there?
Sorry,
Is that you had family there? That's why Chicago was the choice. Is that right? Or
no,
why Chicago?
no. She decided. I don't know. That was her decision. No, I was too little to know,
Okay.
and it was very traumatic for me because I lost my father. I didn't knew nothing about him for more than 5 years, and in those years that I was absent, that's when my father started to become a very wealthy person, a very success a businessman in Colombia, but nobody knew that he was one of the top drug leaders in the world.
Right. And so when you returned, you were 11, you say, right? And that's when
I was
you
11, yeah, 11, 12 years old.
and then you kind of reacquainted with your father. Tell me a little bit about that experience. I mean, having been away from your father for so long, what was it like coming back and trying to get reconnected?
It was very difficult, no, because he didn't have a very good relation with my mother. He blamed her for what happened. She took me away from him, and but I decided to try to see him. I met him. He was a different man that I remember, like a little kid, because he was a very busy person. He had a big ego. It wasn't easy at first, and then I started to come back to my family on the side of my father. And when I was 12, I took like a drastic decision. No, I decided to leave my mother and go and live with the family of my dad.
Mhm.
I don't know why I did it. Maybe because I wanted to get back to my mother, because she took my father away. Maybe it was, the comfort of living a different life, a very, how you say that, luxurious life, a very,
So he was
my
wealthy,
father and my family was very rich. And
right?
yeah, he was wealthy now. And kids are very, when we're that age, we want to be good. We want to have all nice stuff that I never had. So, and something that moved me too was that I went to live with my aunt, the first wife of my uncle Gilberto, and she had 4 kids. So I never, I was the only child of my mother, and I never, had a family like that. So that seduced me too, and they received me like one of them. So it was, one of the happiest years of my life, when I was like 13 until I was like 18, and not like I was 25 or something like that, because I lived like in a close family.
Oh, mhm.
And my aunt was a very strict, and she taught me a lot of things that maybe people don't believe that going involved in this activity has, because we were a normal family until like I was like 18 or 19 years old when my uncle was captured in Spain. So that's when life started to change a little bit.
Sure. So the aunt that you lived with, she obviously knew about the criminal activity going on, but you and your cousins had no idea, right? Is that right?
No, it was like that because my father and uncle never wanted to get the family involved in these activities. They live a double life. They were like very successful businessmen. They had a lot of companies, legal companies, and drugstores, sorry, pharmacies. They have radio station, banks, and we had everything was legitimate,
Okay.
legitimate.
Legitimate, yeah.
But unfortunately, yeah, but unfortunately, it wasn't like that. They had a double life, but they always set us apart about that. We cannot, nobody could talk to us about that, and it was like a secret, but people, you heard some stuff sometimes, but you didn't put too much attention because we didn't care. We were in a family, and didn't see nothing, like suspicious or something of the activities.
Right. And so I know you had a special interest in soccer. So as a kid, when you moved back, were your family and cousins helpful in trying to get you into soccer, or was it the other way around? Were you involved in soccer and stuff in Colombia? Was there a lot of opportunities to play and stuff down there?
Wait, so that's the the most important for the Colombia. Every space we had between classes, we're playing soccer, and I started like having an amazing feeling to this sport, and my family too, no, because my dad was, and when I was like 13 years old in 79, he bought a team, a soccer team, and so that's something that was in our life, present in our lives. There was something very important for our family, and mostly for me because I wanted to play soccer in a professional way,
Mm-hmm.
but it was difficult because my father had other plans for me. He wanted me to be a successful businessman, and so he wanted me to study, and so I have to make a decision, and it was easier, and not easier, it was the way should it be in those days because we did what they wanted us to do. So
Yeah.
so I decided to go to law school and become a lawyer.
Right. And then how old were you when you graduated? You had a master's degree in business and a law degree, is that correct? And then how old were you when you made that decision and finished school?
When I finished, it was in the 90s, in 99. I was how old I was. I was like 25 years, like 20, 25, something like that, when I
Mm-hmm.
became a lawyer.
Okay.
25, 26 year old. Yeah, 25. Then I went to Spain a year, and I got my master's degrees in business, and then I started working in my law firm.
And so once you became a lawyer, obviously that was something that your father and your uncle wanted you to do. So how did you end up transitioning from doing your law firm, which was your business, into being involved in your father and uncle's business, which was obviously the Cali Cartel at that point? Because that's now at the age where you're aware of what they're doing and you hadn't been really involved up until then. So explain to me a little bit about how you went from having your own practice into moving into your father and uncle's business.
Like I tell you, they don't want us mixing that. They want us, to run their legal business. And, I was the lawyer of the companies, and I have my own clients. I made money, a lot of money, resolving legal stuff. But then, when Escobar died, the pressure came into the Cali Cartel. The persecution was against my father and uncle and his organization. And then his circle, his moving, the way he moved was very difficult. So he needed me to do some legal stuff for him. So then I started to get involved in those activities, doing some stuff for him. And when he was captured in 95, then he called me into the prison he was in and told me that I had to help him because, you know, a lot of people were in prison and a lot of people of his organization was running. So he didn't have nobody he could trust. So he needed me to do some stuff for the cartel. He wanted me to do the legal, part and the political part. And then I got involved in corruption.
So what's the main difference between the legal things you did and the political things you did? Because it seems like those would be totally opposite, but in the cartel world, a lot of those things
It's
go
not,
hand in hand, right? So tell me about how you got
yeah,
involved
go hand to hand.
and
It has, it was hand in hand because, to survive, you need politicians, you need police enforcement, you need persecutors because the cases are in la fiscalía, no, we call it as the persecutor. So I had to, move in all those sectors because we needed that. We need for law enforcement because to try to prevent they continue seeking for information. We needed the persecutors because the cases were there. We needed to resolve. There were a lot of cases against my family. And in the political sector, I had to go in because in those days, what happened? My father and uncle invested $10 million in the president campaign in Colombia, and they got elected. This guy Samper in '94. And a phone call was, they tapped a phone call between my uncle and some guy who was like the middleman, the lobbyist guy.
Right.
And then everybody found out what my father and uncle, has done in the cartel. They financed that politic campaign. So the world came falling on us because the United States found out, the legal power that my father and the cartel had in Colombia, and now we were the number one, object. Right. So when my dad falls in prison, the United States had like a lot of projects they wanted to enforce in Colombia laws. To fight the drug cartels, like they wanted back the extradition that was canceled in '91, and they wanted to enforce some laws on laundering money. So they imposed those, and I had to fight them against those projects in the Senate and in the how you call that? The Cámara de Representantes. I don't know.
The political
in the Congress, the Congress. So
sure.
I was like the main pawn to try to fight against those big projects that your country wanted to impose in Colombia, and it was a very hard fight. Because what was the difference between the Cartel Cali and the Cartel Medellin? We're not a violent organization against civil and politics and all that. We don't believe in that. Our war against the government, and it's not by violence. It was legally, like corruption. That was like the way we believe that should be fought. And so we tried it, but it was a very difficult because the United States was in top. They wanted Colombia. They wanted that part in South America. Colombia is not the entrance to the continent. In Colombia, and United States wanted to be there.
Right.
So they were investing a lot of money, and it was very difficult. And I fought a lot of wars, but in the end, we're gonna lose because you cannot win a war against the United States. Maybe you won some battles, but the war you're gonna lose it in the end. And then slowly, because if you were in the enforcement business of the police, you don't care if it goes slowly, but in the end, you're gonna accomplish what you want because you're a very powerful and you have a lot of people and you have a lot of time to finish a bus. And we had a lot of resources, but in the end, we were not a lot of people fighting against a country like the United States.
Right. So, and that brings me back to an idea that I had too. When you were talking, I recall you mentioning at some point when the Medellin cartel went down and Pablo Escobar was killed, then obviously you were the primary target at that point, right? And there was a time before Escobar went down where you mentioned that your uncle and your father had considered getting out of the business and just taking their taking their profits and getting out of the business. Tell me how that ended up. How did they end up changing their mind? Because it seems like you were this close to getting away with everything and moving on, but there was a change of heart. What happened?
No, the problem is that you wanna get be legitimate, and something happens, and in that moment, my uncle we had a very hard process in Spain. My uncle was captured there, and he almost was he was sent over here in 85. But my dad, moved all his influence, all the money, and he accomplished something that it was incredible. He brought my uncle from Spain to Colombia, and he freed him in 97. So we had very powerful companies in those moments. They had a lot of money, and I think was the most important economic moment in the cartel history, in my family history. We had a lot of money. So they were thinking really to move forward from this business, but then Escobar appeared in the picture, and Escobar didn't never forgave them because they didn't follow him in the war against the country. They what I told you before. My dad didn't believe in violence against the state, and Escobar wanted that. So they say no, we're gonna fight the other way. If you want, you fight your war. We'll be in this other side fighting. That it will help us again too. But Escobar was he or you were with him or you was against him. So in the end, we know he was gonna come for them, and he was waiting for the moment, and then in that moment we had a problem with him because our associates of my father, Pacho Herrera, one of the cartel's member, and then he wanted them to give him up and fight a war against him,
So
and then we're just now from Escobar, and then we have to
right.
monster of 100 heads with money.
You're breaking up real bad. Could you talk about? You said he had some a reward on your heads or something. Is what you said? You were breaking up.
Oh, he got upset because
Yeah, I
we
can't hear
didn't
you.
follow him in the war against the state.
Yeah, I lost you.
Do you hear me better?
Now I can hear you, but
Do you
I
hear
don't.
me better?
Yeah, I can hear you. There you are. Okay, yeah, you're coming back a little bit. You broke up and I lost you. You were explaining that that Escobar insisted that you guys join him in the war against the state. You insisted that you weren't going to do that, so they decided to stay in the business. Essentially, they stayed in the business in order to fight Escobar, and he had put some rewards on your heads and everything else. So my question is, how do you fight a Pablo Escobar without violence? What was your strategy there?
No, I'm telling you, we were not fighting against Escobar without violence. I'm telling you, we didn't want to fight against the state by the force. So, but that's why when they go to war to Escobar, everything is value, no? So they needed a lot of money to fight against this guy, and they were doing a lot of violence because they needed to survive against this guy because this guy was a monster.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the main things that my dad and uncle did was they got the police involved, and the police was like the hired by them to finish Escobar off.
And was that Colombian police or DEA or both?
Oh, Colombian police.
Okay.
The problem is that remember Escobar was fighting a war against a lot of people. He was fighting against the state, the police, United States, and the Pepes, a lot of nations. The
Right.
Cartel of Cali. He was fighting against everybody. So in a moment to to finish this guy off, a lot of people came together, to resolve that
Right.
issue. So I'm not telling the DA was, part of us in that. DA maybe knew some activities were going on between the Cartel of Cali, the police, and the Pepes, and they looked the other way. You see,
Yeah. Yeah.
because everybody wanted to finish this chapter off, and that was the only way. Because this guy was a tremendous uh, bandit, and he was a very intelligent person and a very capable guy, and he had a
Right.
lot of people
Yeah.
by his side. So a lot of people had to come together to finish this guy off.
So when after he went away, then obviously the Cali Cartel became the next target of the United States because at that point you were the biggest thing there is, and at some point
Mhm.
they arrest your uncle, and which moves you to a new level too because at this time you're working with them doing all the legal stuff and everything. So explain to somebody who would have no idea how you would do this, how would you, since this was kind of one of your jobs to approach politicians and prosecutors and everything, how would you approach a police officer, for instance, and try to gain some political advantage for the cartel? Explain how that would work.
I was not a I was not go I was not a guy who goes first to talk to the guy. I had some other person that do this for me first, the first approach to see where we are with that person, and then when the guy is ready, then I go and try to try to bribe him. So how did I did that? Pues it's easy, Colombian, unfortunately, Colombian police, attorneys, prosecutors don't win a lot of money. And so it's easier, to offer a big amount of money, and not everybody, can be bought, but a lot of people will think it and say, well, this is a good opportunity for me to make, my future.
Sure.
So that's the way, I started. I sent first some people to talk to them to see where we are, and then when everything is ready, then I appear, because I had to be very careful too.
Right. Okay. Tell me about what happens after your uncle is put in prison. What happened with the cartel and your position?
No, my uncle and my dad, no, the two go to prison, the two are captured. One is my uncle was captured first in June. No, in June, and my dad is captured in August. And then they sent for me, and like I go like 5 days later than my father is captured to Bogota. And then I meet him in the prison, and he told me he needed me. So I decided, maybe I was waiting for that moment, in my mind. Maybe my father was not thinking about that, but he didn't have any another option. But maybe that's what I wanted, because I always was looking up on my father. And part of this story, in that moment, my father was like my idol in those moments, because he was the patron he was the leader of my family,
Mm-hmm.
one of the leaders of my family. And I believe it was my duty to help them. So and I knew what that was going to bring to me, because sometimes people never understand what power means, and when you feel it and you experience it, it's a very difficult thing to feel, because you think you can do everything. You think you're a Superman, but then life will teach you that's not the way. You see, so in that moment, I was, I was like living in not a real world, and
Right.
I believe we can do anything.
And you talk about that in your book too, about how you feel like you were making decisions that you normally wouldn't decide based on who you were inside, and your wife and your kids and everything else. You were making decisions that were self-serving and not necessarily good for them, right? at that point?
My friend, because in those moments, I didn't love nobody. I love myself only. I changed in the bad way,
Right.
because I believe I can be my father and I can do anything. But then God taught me that that is not so easy.
Yeah, which leads us obviously to the next stage, and tell us a little bit about the extraordinary experience that you had when they tried to assassinate you. You had several other people with you. You were shot, what, 8 times, and are still here. So tell me a little bit about that. Was it Los Pepes that put this hit out, and tell me why and kind
No,
of what
no, no.
led up to that.
That was Jose Santa Cruz. Was the third man in the cartel of Cali. The guy escaped from prison. He was with my dad and uncle. He decided to go, and and then he wanted to fight a war against another cartel that was emerging. There was the North Valley Cartel, a very big organization, a very powerful one. And so this guy, made a bad decision because he he was not the man anymore. Those guys were the men. They had everything. They had the Pepes, they had the paramilitaries, the right with them, they had the police with them. So it was a war we were not gonna win. So he goes out, and then he got betrayed by Carlos Castaño, the one of the right wing paramilitary organization.
Okay.
And Chepe believed that he was going to be with him, and no, he betrayed him, he killed him, and he gave them to the police. So the police say, we assassinate this guy, we tried to catch him, and we killed him. But it wasn't that way. It was they were killed by these guys of the North Valley Cartel and Carlos Castaño. And then when that happens, they always were, thinking we were going to do something against them because, this guy was so close to my dad, to my uncle.
Right.
They were on top of us, seeing what we're doing. And somebody said a lie about something that was true that we were doing against them. And then the guy decided that they were going to go. They were going to go against us. And that's why I got shot.
Tell me about that day. Like, who were you with, and tell me about your experience. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary that you're even here.
Yeah, that day, the day I used to go to a place like an hour from Cali. It's called Buga. There's like a saint that we believe in it. It's called El Señor de los Milagros. And I was gonna visit this guy because I made a promise to him. But I couldn't do it because something happened in the soccer team. I had to, attend some meeting over there because they called me from the soccer team office that they needed me because we're making a big sell to Portugal, a player. And then I went there and I was there like 2 hours, and then my cousin came over and some friends, and then we decided to go and have lunch. I know something told me to call my wife. I called her, say I loved her, say goodbye. Maybe it was to say goodbye to her, and then that happened. No, 10 guys came to near the restaurant. 4 went up, and they started shooting at us. And then I survived because I put my arms and I stand up, and then I got shot. But when I fell to the ground, and I asked God to give me a new opportunity. And I thought about my little. I have 2 kids, but at that moment I only had one.
Mm-hmm.
Isabella, my oldest daughter, and then he made a miracle. No, he saved me because in that moment I feel like I was not gonna die, and I didn't die. I was 8 times shot. 6 people died that day, and I lost almost half of my blood in my body.
Yeah.
So it was a miracle. So, and God told me in that moment that I was nothing, that he was the guy who had the power. And then I learned that people that maybe like my wife that was by my side, always, that I didn't care about her. In those moments when I thought I was in the glory, and she helped me. She treated me. She was by my side, and then I decided to try to change my life. It's not an excuse. No, it's not. It wasn't that easy because I was trapped like in a web. Because it was loyalty against my family, my dad, my uncle. They were always there for me.
Right.
But in the end, I knew that I was now, I was seeing things the right way, and they were thinking bad because they were still up there, floating in the air, and I was down here, and then that's when we started to have problems with them because I was telling the truth, the way I saw it. I always told them that we have to look for a way out of this, and I knew that we were not gonna win the war against you guys, and so. But they always was fighting, legally with you guys, so for more than 20 years, and they believed that was the way. And
yeah,
and we were getting, we're spending a lot of money. We're not anymore in the drug business, and we're not, coming in so much money. We're living on our companies, and we're getting, how you say, we're getting beat by you guys. We're getting, I don't know what's the word in English. Like, we're very, nos estamos debilitando. I don't know what's the word for that.
Okay.
Like, we're, so then I started the problems. Then I decided, I started, getting away a little bit from these activities. I decided to hide myself in the soccer. I started to manage the team. I was gonna live in 1996 to Argentina and stay there and live, but unfortunately I got my first indictment over here.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't go out of the country because if they catch me outside, they'll bring me here.
Right.
So that was I started to change my life, but I still was loyal to my dad because that's the way it should be, and I was waiting, and because I knew sooner or later you're gonna catch up to us and bring us over here, and now we have extradition law, and everybody's talking, and you guys, the enforcement guys, are very happy because everybody's telling a lot of stuff. So it was it was coming, and it came in 2001. They made me a new indictment in New York, and then I had to start running.
You start running at that point? Is that what you said?
Yeah, in 2001, because I found out that they were coming for me, and some people that we had in the secret police, they told me that they're making an indictment and they were gonna make the warrant against me.
So how long did that last, and what did you do in order to try to hide? It seems like that's, now that you know, that's just a matter of time. What did you do, and where did you go?
Yeah, I knew because they went first for me. They saw me like the bridge to bring my father and uncle over here because I was the guy outside, and so I knew that I had to hide myself. So I did it different than they did, because they did it with a lot of people with rings of security. I ran with 1 or 2 persons, and I was moving every month from here, and I have a very disciplined life. I didn't use the phone. Everything was, I had a messenger guy who brought me the answers. I wrote letters. They wrote letters to me. It was a very, very, very difficult. I think it's one of the most difficult part of my life because now I don't depend on myself. I depend on others, and everybody start to forget about you because everybody continues their lives. And now I'm like this guy. I'm like, poor William. But nobody's doing nothing for William, and William is waiting. William is in the freezer.
Yeah. Yeah, just waiting for his time, right? And I guess you were separated from your family during that time too, right? I assume.
Yeah, sure. I see my wife. I see my kids and my wife every 6 months almost because I cannot be with them. They have to continue their life.
Yeah.
There will be like the police. Police already said they were gonna catch me because of my kids. Unfortunately, I was not captured. I surrendered myself to you guys in Panama. But yeah, it was a very difficult. It was a very lonely 4 years, and then you find out in the end you were fighting for something that wasn't worth it. You were sell some ideas that they weren't true. You see, so now because when in this lifestyle, everybody looks for it themselves. So in the end, and I had to wait. I decided to wait because I knew they were gonna go for my dad and uncle. They're gonna bring out some indictments over here, and I said I'm gonna wait for them when their times and their indictments are gonna come and their warnings are gonna come. I think they'll come to their senses and try to do a bit a deal with you guys, but they weren't thinking that way. They were thinking wrong,
Yeah.
because they believe that with all those proofs and all the money they had given to those politicians, they were gonna be faithful to them. But the politicians are not faithful for nobody.
Yeah. That's unfortunate. And so there are, I guess, your father and uncle are doing time. Where are they serving time in the U.S.?
They've been in different parts. Now I think my dad is in Pennsylvania in a place called Loreto.
Mm-hmm.
And my uncle, he's in Barner. There's like a hospital in North Carolina.
Okay. Yeah.
Because yeah, they've been moving from different places. They've been in prison in here from 206. So
Yeah.
no, 205. Sorry. So it's been a lot more than 15 years.
Yeah. And you ended up doing some time as well. Obviously, after running, you did some prison time as well. What did you serve?
I did 5 years. I was like 1.5 year in Miami and 3.5 in South Carolina.
Okay. So, what now, knowing what you know now, what would you tell somebody? I mean, there's still gangsters and there's still narcotics trafficking at every level, small and big. You obviously were on a huge level, but what would you tell like a kid that's coming up in the street that's wanting to join a gang and serve narcotics or feels like he can move up the chain and become some kind of a big wig? What would you tell them based on what you know now?
It's, I'm nobody to tell nobody what to do, because it's about the life is about decisions. But I only can bring you some advice and see what my life was. I cannot say I didn't have power, I didn't have money. I did. I had a lot of good times too. But in the end, when I make the equation, positive and negatives is more negative of this life. And in the end, this is not like they show in Netflix and in the movies. It's easy and you'll get there easy. And, sorry, and the life is wonderful. No, it's not easy because when more money and more power you have, more lonely you feel because you're gonna be hiding or you're gonna be in a prison cell or you're
Yeah.
gonna be dead. So
Yeah.
it's about the decision. And what can I say to that kid? Don't do it. I understand it's not easy, where they are, because there's not a lot of opportunities. But this life is very difficult, and certainly you're gonna be in prison, and if you're lucky. If you're not lucky, you're gonna be dead. So that's about your decision, no, about life, and and that's why I try to speak and give my lectures, and I'm fully committed to try to show people that this is not the answer, and not because you know nobody's paying me to do this. Something that I believe that I have to tell people. You see, this is not the way. It's not the answer. I understand, and they're victims of the system because the system wants them to make mistakes and go to prison. They're making a lot of money sending people to prison.
Yeah.
But you have to try to look for another alternatives. And I know it's not easy. It's not easy because there are not a lot of opportunities. But this life, you have to think about it because I tell you, it's very hard. It's not an easy life, a very hard life. In the end, you'll get betrayed.
Yeah. And is that so? Does it cause any issues with you when you see the Netflix series in particular? I know everyone asks you about this, but everyone wants to know, since they romanticize it and make it seem so wonderful, how much of that is accurate? I mean, you explained a little bit. Obviously, some of it is fantastic. It's just such a short time that it's not worth it because you have so much more time to live, hopefully. But what are your feelings about the Netflix series, the Narcos stuff? How is it?
I believe it's not only Netflix. It's like a period of time. It's been more than 20 years when you only see stories about Narcos in the television. So I know the most watched is Netflix and Narcos was a very watched series. But sorry about the words, bullshit that series because 80% is lie and 20% or 15% is the truth. And I think they didn't, send a real message, because they're 15, there were 1, 2, 3, like 3 or 4 series of Netflix that we're talking about 13 chapters. There's 26. That's like 52 chapters where 49 are glorifying this activity,
right,
and 3 are the guy was dead or the guy was captured.
Yeah.
So what are we learning about it? That this is the way. Oh, this? Everybody knows me more from Netflix that from my story and what I say because they think it was a very cool life. That we lived, and maybe in part I cannot say lie. In part, yes, I lived a very high profile life for a moment in my life, but let's say 3 or 4 years, and I'm 55, so there's been more than 25 or 26 years of my life suffering the consequences of my bad actions. Not mine own. I'm the only one who's not suffering. My wife, my kids. My wife almost got bald like me for all the stress. She lost. She broke 3 of her teeth. My kids have issues. And I've been I believe I'm a good dad, but but in a moment of my life, it's all more about me than them. So
right.
It's not only about the consequences are only going to follow you. They're going to follow your family. So that's why it's your decision. I think we had a lot of stuff, and now everything is gone because this is like this money is like it's an illusion. It goes maybe because you earn it in a moment so easy it comes to you. Maybe that's why it goes so fast. So
right.
This is an illusion. So it's about you American guys. You Americans say it's about the ride, right? But I don't know if the ride is worth it.
Yeah, and you're lucky that you're even here. Like I said, you're still paying the consequences. But
I should be dead or walking in a federal prison.
Yeah. Okay, so 2 more quick questions. The first is, now that you've lived in the States for this many years, what are the comparisons that you can make between life here, where we have racial division and the politicians are causing everybody to have all this drama in their lives? And I know there was a lot of that in Colombia, but compare the two. What's your experience like here compared to where you grew up?
No, here, pues, live a normal life, a calm life. I achieved something that I wanted to do. I can sit down anywhere have a beer or a Coca-Cola or a water without looking in my in my shoulder. So, and that I accomplished a lot, this is a very calm life. And what we used to live in our countries, there's a lot of insecurity. A lot of people get killed for anything. But it's dangerous everywhere, no? You see what happened here in the Capitolio, what happened in Washington, D.C. Crazy, things that shouldn't happen in this country. But that's about politicians. That's about power, So violence is everywhere, but I think life here is much better, more easier to, that we used to live. Colombia is like in the 40s, your 40s.
Yeah.
And when I was there, it was like in the 30s when, gangsters were shooting everybody out.
Right.
My father and uncle, when they were in power, they had a lot of different rules. They had a lot, people maybe say, how can those bandits have some principles? Yeah, my dad had principles. My dad was a guy of honor. He never killed nobody for money. The violence was the last resort for him. And because he saw this like a business, to make money. But unfortunately, sometimes you get lost, because when you have so much power, you start to lose it. And that what happened with my dad and uncle. They started to lose it because they believed they were Superman and Batman, and they can do anything because they thought that they killed Escobar and they can do anything.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. And then lastly, I wanted to see if you would talk a little bit about your reconciliation and getting back together with Pablo Escobar's son, Sebastian Marroquin, who's a friend of ours also. And tell me a little bit about how you guys came to be friends and aspire to make peace and continue to spread the word.
But yeah, I follow Sebastian, when he started, doing his lectures and his documentaries. And I saw a change in this kid because, I had sometimes you start to hear and people talk bad about somebody and then you start like believing it. But I, I'm not that kind of people. I want to see things. And I saw a change in him and a change in my heart. My father always told me, watch out because this guy has the genes of his father.
Mm.
But I don't care, I knew him and I believe he's a friend. And we haven't had the opportunity to meet, but, we had a lot of things in common. We suffered a hard life because being, the son of Escobar or being the son of the Cartel of Cali, because I'm the son of my uncle and my dad. I live with the two, they were my dads.
Mm-hmm.
That's not easy, having that on your shoulders, and everybody is seeing when you're gonna fall. Sorry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so, we got together and talking this way, you and me are. That's the only way we know ourselves between, Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the only relation we have because he cannot come in here and I cannot go out from the United States for my legal statutes.
Yeah.
And we decided to do something different than everybody believed we should do. So we decided we're going to show people that we can fix this because in the end, he never did nothing to me and I never did nothing to him. So why should we hate ourselves?
Yeah.
And I think it's a very powerful message. And I hope someday we can get together and walk this, in the same road and show people that you can resolve any problem. This guy and me should have killed ourselves. My dad, I think 60% of the death of Escobar is on my dad's shoulders and hands, but I never did nothing to him, and he knows that his father made a lot of mistakes too,
Mm-hmm.
and so we want to show different message, and that's what we're trying to do. It's been difficult, the pandemic, the system. it's against us, but we're gonna get through it. We've been through more worse things than this.
For sure. For sure. Well, I admire you for doing that. And I hope also that we can get that done where you guys get a chance to see each other in person and continue to work together and spread this message of reconciliation. I think that's super admirable. I really respect you for that.
Thank you, my friend. And we're working in some projects that maybe we can accomplish. We're working. I'm trying to, and I'm gonna bring him into. I'm trying to work with a foundation over here that's gonna try to help inmates when they come out of prison. That's something I believe too. I think that's powerful. It's not only to put people in jail. It's trying to get them out and trying to give them a second chance because they don't get it. I suffer that. I've been 10 years out, and it's very difficult to if I don't have my wife on my side, I don't know if I will make it because everything is difficult when you have a record, and I believe this organization can help, and I'm gonna be part of them. I hope we can achieve this, because we're gonna give them the second chance to get their heads together, get their lives together, and have a way to make an honest living.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's rarely that they get the chance, but the fact is, if they've served their time, they deserve some respect and opportunity, right? So that's fantastic plight for you. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it's been an honor as always. I always love talking to you, my friend, and thank you so much for sharing. And is there anything else that you wanted to share with the audience in terms of anything that you're doing or wanted to say that we didn't cover?
No, I think we cover everything. I believe. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I'm reading your book. I'm on chapter 4 because I was reading another one.
Great!
I know. A very fantasy story too, how you got infected and how did you do that? Because you're so white and you're getting,
Yeah, I know. Hey, you got to get to the end.
No, thank you, my friend. Whenever you need something, I'm here, and thank you for inviting me, and I hope that people understand that my message. I did my time, and I deserve it. All the like you say, I'm a lucky person. I should be in prison, but God decided me to put me out, and I'm here, and I hope I can help people understand that this is not the way. Not because I don't feel proud about my dad. No, it's my dad. I loved him, but he made a lot of mistakes. But he's been a man, and maybe he'll die in a prison for his sins.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's the only route that this lifestyle has, or what, a prison cell or a grave in a cemetery.
Yeah. Well, I wish you all the luck, and I certainly stand by you. And if you need anything from me, brother, anytime, just reach out. Be happy to help. And I'm really proud to know you and glad to see all the good things that you're doing. So thanks again for taking the time to visit with me, brother.
Oh, thank you, my friend. And sorry for my bad English, but I'm trying to get better.
That's fine, brother. We'll see you soon, man.
Thank you. Bye.
You gotta get it. Gotta get it. Y'all don't understand the condition that he living. He on a mission. You can't knock the ambition. All he ever wanted was his daddy's attention. But dad didn't listen, so the streets done raised him. 9 to 5, yeah, the streets done paid him. Started at the bottom, but the streets done made him. This is way out, ain't no ultimatum. Ain't no that can fade him, he don't care who hate him. Feeling like the world turned to all betrayed him.